Hello there. Right now there's a global food shortage, but we in the West appear to be intent on making it worse. Now, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and then like and comment below. The likes of the WEF and the UN would rather like to see the world's population put on a controlled diet to make sure we were only eating sufficient for our needs, so we take up less space, and by eating a lot less we will be saving the planet, of course. And as part of this, they would like to see those involved in agriculture farm more sustainably, which means much less nitrogen-based fertiliser and therefore much less yield per acre. And in the Netherlands they've started a scheme to pay at least what the business is worth to buy farmers out, and they've put aside €25 billion to do it. And they need 2,000 to 3,000 farmers to come forward and take up the offer, therefore reducing the country's food production capability. Now, the €25 billion may be the same size as the Dutch hospitality sector, but the farmers say it's insufficient anyway. Now, this stems from the Netherlands setting up 162 Natura 2000 areas, where nitrogen levels have to be strictly controlled, so the farms near them need to be shut down. And further, if the 2,000 to 3,000 farmers don't step forward and sell their land and business to the government, they are being threatened with compulsory purchases to force them off the land. And that is one big red line for the Dutch farmers. And for the long term, Dutch ministers are looking to levy a tax on nitrogen emissions along the lines of the CO2 levy, so they can reach the EU nitrogen level requirements. And that will affect the remaining farms, one assumes. But while they're doing this in the Netherlands, Brussels is also trying to come up with a rescue plan to ensure that EU farmers have access to nitrogen fertilisers to keep the food flowing. And nitrogen fertilisers need a lot of natural gas, phosphates and potash. So we can't seem to make our minds up, can we? We're in the process of getting rid of the very things that promote food production. And once natural gas has been phased out and nitrogen is virtually outlawed, then what? Well, it'll be insects and beans for the proles. Anyway, the degrowth plan is now in place and up and running. But I wonder if the likes of Bill Gates will be participating in this degrowth by degrowing his fortune and agricultural land holdings in the US. Will the billionaires be degrowing their personal carbon footprints? Will they be downsizing to the almost impossible to reach target of 2 tons of carbon emissions per person per year? Or are they much too important for that? Now, in one piece of good news, the bread and circuses for the cerebrally challenged masses is about to end. I speak, of course, of the "I'm not a celebrity and need exposure, so get me in there." And after that, another distraction will be offered to the pond life sat mindlessly in front of their TVs, all wondering who this Matt Hancock character is. Now, you know lockdowns are abusive and wrong when you see even the iron hand of the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, can't stop anti-lockdown protests spreading across the country as he tries to impose his harsh zero COVID policy on the people. Chanting, "We want freedom," the protesters in Wuhan pulled down COVID quarantine barricades. A far cry from the days when the Chinese authorities swooped in and cooped their citizens up using draconian methods. So far, China has seen riots in an iPhone factory, demonstrations in the Xinjiang region, and student marches at top Chinese universities. And all this is being framed as a massive challenge to Xi Jinping himself, as well as making it as much of a threat to the Chinese Communist Party as the Tiananmen Square protests were. But it would take a lot more than this to rescue the people of China from their leader for life and his party of total surveillance and dominance over the population. Even though protesters are demanding the resignation of Xi Jinping over these harsh pandemic rules. And in Shanghai, the BBC is reporting on a protest where they saw protesters being bundled into police cars. And it seems that the Chinese government has underestimated the growing discontent over these COVID restrictions. Or maybe they overestimated their own ability to maintain firm control over their citizens. But protests like these in places like China are unlikely to be about a single issue. It would take a lot of discontent across a range of issues, and maybe the deaths caused by a fire in a locked-down tower block in Urumqi was the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's borne out with reports that students have been waving placards demanding democracy and freedom of expression while singing about freedom. But the one thing the Chinese authorities don't seem to lack at the moment is a number of police officers. And I would think that the communist rule will prevail and order will be restored. But I do wonder what the Chinese people would do with democracy if they were ever able to depose their communist rulers. But one thing I would ask is how close did we come to having more and more draconian measures placed on us, including enforced medical procedures? And there are still many people out there who would be very happy to see all that return, especially those in the PPE and pharmacy type business. As we've seen, there's lots of dosh to be made there, all those plastic disposable masks and repeat prescriptions. And now Richard explains why we need a Labour government right now.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening. Labour, the People's Party. Well, if the people are anti-Semitic and originate from anywhere other than Britain, that is. We need them in power, and we need them now. I know what you're thinking. Has he lost his mind? He was only supporting reform the other day. Or has he taken some of those mushrooms that grow on the hills in Wales in September that once ingested make the tops of reservoirs look like 1980s hi-fis? Yes, those mushrooms that make an owl hoot sound like, "Warren, buy me a drink." Well, apparently that can be heard when one ingests these things, so I am told. Not that I have ever experienced such a thing, but anyway, back to point. So, why do we need a Labour government? Well, the Tory party is over. No saving that one, and a jolly good job too. But I am afraid Labour is still intact and epitomises the utopian, or should I say dystopian, nightmare of liberal lefty ideology, and that dangerous ideology needs to be consigned to the dustbin of history where it belongs. But right now, Labour is still romanticised over by yogurt-weaving, tofu-munching, eco-zealite millennials. And they are growing in number. So they need to live through and experience the reality of a socialist society, where hope is a thing of the past, aspiring to improve oneself will be frowned upon, and poverty will be commonplace. They need to see the socialist vision manifest for themselves, face to face with that which the people of the former Soviet states could not wait to break free from. You see, the problem is we have nearly 2 generations of people who have not lived under a Labour government. And I say 2 generations because Blair and Brown's Labour Party was not Labour, yet Jeremy Corbyn and his metropolitan liberal lefty mates still took their paychecks as Labour MPs, even though they were outraged at the Iraq war. But that's a video for another day, and we'll be cutting. Anyway, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by myself, 2 generations of people romanticising socialism and left-wing ideology needs to end. And I believe a Labour government would destroy Britain's economy, the remnants of English culture, and be very short-lived. But that's a necessary evil, I believe now. We've gone too far. And not only would Labour be gone, but the Greens, Plaid Cymru and SNP would follow them, as disdain for their respective liberal left-wing ideologies would discredit them in the eyes of the voters. But Plaid Cymru might be the outlier. Let's not forget Plaid Cymru's origins were, let's say, not left-wing. To conclude, a short-lived Labour government would be the lancing of the boil of socialism in Britain, as the pus of the left is currently bubbling under the surface of the British psyche, like a thing that bubbles under the surface. Let the people have what they want and what they wish for. But as the saying goes, be careful what you wish for. If the plans of men stands the test of fire, then maybe it may have some merit. Ah, the plans of men and kings. And just to let you know, tomorrow's video will be on the exodus of Britain's young and highly skilled as a brain drain hits our shores. Never mind, we have all those Albanian doctors and nurses to cover them, haven't we? Anyway, back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Richard. And finally, when subscribing, please don't forget to press that little bell and also select the all option, or you won't get any notifications when I publish a new video. And thank you all so much for taking the time to watch the show.